I parked my old Buick in front of my daughter's house, feeling my joints creak as I got out of the car. 73 years makes its presence felt, especially in the wet weather that had been in Martinsville all week. The two-story brick house with white shutters looked exactly the same as the day I'd helped Bridget with her down payment. "This is an investment in your future," I said then. Who knew what that future would turn out to be? No sooner had I closed the car door than I heard screams coming from inside the house. Bridget's voice, usually so melodic, sounded sharp and shrill. "Finley, I told you to clean the kitchen. Can't you hear me? Why do I have to say the same thing 100 times?" I froze in the driveway. The surprise visit was clearly more of a surprise than I'd planned. Through the open kitchen window, I could see my daughter, arms at her sides, towering over a little boy who was staring at the floor as if hoping to fall through it. "Yeah, I tried, Mom," Finley answered quietly. His voice barely reached me, but I could make out the tremor in it. My grandson, a skinny boy with a mop of unruly brown hair, looked tiny in front of his angry mother. "Tried?" Bridget teased. "Look at this mess. Crumbs all over the table, dirty plates in the sink. Do you want Conrad to come home and see this?" A chuckle came from the other end of the kitchen. I squinted, recognizing the other two kids sitting at the dining room table with their phones in their hands. Conrad's children from his first marriage, Aubrey and Noah. The older girl, with long blonde hair pulled back into a perfect ponytail, smirked, keeping her eyes on the screen. "Mom, leave him alone," she said with feigned sympathy. "He's just a little boy. Maybe he needs a bottle and a pacifier." Noah, a boy of about 11, giggled as if his sister had said something incredibly witty. "And a diaper," he added, and they both burst into laughter. Bridget didn't even turn to them as she continued to reprimand her son. "You had 2 hours to do a basic thing. 2 hours. And what? Nothing." I saw Finley's shoulders shake, and I couldn't stand by any longer. Climbing the porch steps, I knocked on the door louder than I intended. The screams instantly subsided. A few seconds later, the door swung open and Bridget stood on the doorstep with a strained smile and slightly flushed cheeks. "Daddy," she exclaimed with feigned joy. "What a surprise. Why didn't you tell me you were coming?" I looked over her shoulder at Finley, who was standing at the kitchen counter, wiping his eyes with his sleeve. "I decided to visit spontaneously," I answered, walking into the house. Sometimes it was good to see how family lived when they weren't expected. Bridget giggled nervously, but there was a twinkle of irritation in her eyes. "Come on, you're always welcome, aren't you, kids?" Aubrey and Noah simultaneously pulled away from their phones and said a lifeless, "Hello, Mr. Hutton," before returning to their screens. Finley, on the other hand, rushed over to me and hugged my legs tightly. "Grandpa!" he exclaimed with a genuine joy that prickled my heart. I leaned over and hugged him back, noticing how thin his cheeks had gotten since the last time I'd seen him 3 months ago. "Hey, baby, how are you?" "Good," he answered automatically, but his eyes said otherwise. Bridget hurriedly intervened. "Finley was just cleaning up the kitchen, wasn't he, honey? Why don't you finish up while I show Grandpa the guest room?" Her voice was sweet, but the look she threw at her son was icy. Finley nodded and reluctantly let me go, returning to his task. "Kids, why don't you help your brother?" I suggested, looking at Aubrey and Noah. Aubrey rolled her eyes with such vigor that I wondered how they didn't get stuck in that position. "He's not my brother," she replied. "He's Bridget's son." "Aubrey," Bridget said warningly, but with no real reproach in her voice. "Well?" The girl shrugged her shoulders. "It's true. It's not like we're related by blood." I felt anger boiling up inside, but I decided not to make a scene when I arrived. Instead, I walked over to the kitchen counter myself and started picking up crumbs and dirty dishes. "Don't worry, Finley. Grandpa will help." Bridget looked embarrassed. "Daddy, don't. That's Finley's job. He has to learn responsibility." "What about the responsibility of these two?" I asked, nodding at her stepsons. "They live in this house too, I understand." Aubrey snorted and Noah just stared deeper into his phone. They have other responsibilities, Bridget replied hastily. Aubrey helps with dinner and Noah takes out the trash. I noticed the quick exchange of glances between the stepsons and realized it was probably a lie. But I decided to save that conversation for later. So where's Conrad? I asked, helping Finley load the dishwasher. At work. He's very busy with a new project at the print shop, Bridget answered, and I could hear the note of pride in her voice. He got a promotion last month. And yet, he's not so busy that his children can't help with the chores? Bridget tensed, and I saw her face change. She looked like a stranger. Where had my little Bridget gone? Who had once helped me write letters to my mother after she left? The girl who cried over every wounded chick? The woman in front of me seemed a shell of the Bridget I knew. "Papa, let's not get started," she said quietly. "You just got here. Why don't you get some rest?" I nodded, deciding to back off for now. Finley and I quickly cleaned up the kitchen, working together while Aubrey and Noah moved into the living room, where they turned the TV on full volume. "Where's your guest room?" I asked, wiping my hands with a towel. "Upstairs, second door on the right," Bridget answered. "I was just about to take the kids to soccer practice. Would you mind spending a couple hours with Finley? He doesn't have class today." "Sure," I agreed, glad to have some alone time with my grandson. Bridget hurriedly gathered Aubrey and Noah, reminded Finley to obey his grandfather, and left, leaving us alone in the suddenly quiet house. Finley and I sat in his room, small compared to the others in the house with shabby wallpaper and old furniture. There were books on the shelves, neatly arranged by size, the only bright spot in this dreary space. "Do you like to read?" I asked, looking at the collection. Finley nodded, his face brightening. "More than anything. Mrs. Pratt at the library is always putting away new books about space and dinosaurs for me." I smiled, remembering how Bridget had loved books when she was his age, too. At least that's what she passed on to her son. "How are you doing in school?" "Fine," he answered, shrugging his shoulders. "I'm doing well. Miss Ellington says I'm top of the class in math." "That's great," I praised him, but noticed that his enthusiasm was fading fast. "Do you have any friends?" Finley lowered his eyes, rubbing his ragged stuffed rabbit. "Not very many. Sometimes I play with Tyler and Zeke at recess, but—" He stopped talking. "But what?" He looked up at me, eyes full of uncertainty. "Aubrey told everyone that I'm a crybaby and a mama's boy. Now a lot of people don't want to be friends with me." I felt my fists clench. "How often does Aubrey do this? Say mean things about you?" Finley shrugged again like it was normal. "She and Noah are always like this. They say I'm not the real Pierce because I have a different last name." I remembered that Bridget left Finley the last name Hutton, the only thing left of his father, who died in a car accident when the boy was still an infant. "Does your mom know they talk to you like that?" "Sometimes," Finley answered quietly. "But she says I have to be stronger and not pay attention, that we're all family and need to get used to each other." I shook my head. 4 years had passed since Bridget had married Conrad. 4 years is plenty of time to get used to it. And Conrad? Does he know? Finley squirmed, and I could see the fear in his eyes. "Conrad says I should be grateful he let us live with his family, that real men don't complain." "His family?" I questioned, feeling my insides boil. "I bought this house for your mom. It's your house, not his." Finley looked surprised. "Really? Conrad always says it's his house and his rules." I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself down. What I was learning was making me more anxious by the minute. "Finley, what else happens when I'm not around? Do they hurt you?" He was silent for a long moment, then he said quietly, "Sometimes Noah hides my stuff. And once Aubrey said at school that I wet my bed even though it's not true." Everyone laughed. His voice shook, and I hugged him, feeling the little body shiver. "And Mom? Does she stick up for you?" "She says I have to stand up for myself," Finley answered. But when I try, Conrad says I'm aggressive and rude, and then Mom gets even angrier at me. I looked at my grandson, so small and vulnerable, and remembered the day he was born. How Bridget, holding him in her arms, swore she would always protect him. What had happened to that woman? How could she let her child suffer? "What happens when Mommy gets angry?" I asked cautiously. Finley shrugged. "She yells. Sometimes she won't let me read or watch cartoons. And once, when I accidentally broke a vase that Aubrey and Noah's mom gave me, she made me do all the housework for 2 weeks." 2 weeks? You're only 7 years old. "Almost 8, he corrected, with the seriousness that only children are capable of. We talked for another hour or so. Finley told me about school, about his teacher, Miss Ellington, who was always kind to him, about how he liked to go to the park and feed the ducks. Gradually, he relaxed, and I saw glimpses of the bright, intelligent boy he should have been if he hadn't lived in constant fear and tension. When I heard the sound of a car pulling up, I realized Bridget had returned with her stepsons. Finley instantly tensed up. "Don't tell Mom I complained, please," he asked with concern in his voice. "She'll be upset." "Don't worry," I reassured him, though I was seething with anger inside. It would stay between us. The evening passed in a tense atmosphere. Conrad came home from work around 6, a tall man with thinning hair and a permanent condescending smile. He shook my hand with exaggerated cordiality. "Walter, what a surprise. Bridget didn't say you were coming." "I didn't know," I replied, watching as he hugged Aubrey and ruffled Noah's hair, ignoring Finley completely. I decided to spontaneously visit my family. At dinner, I watched them interact. Bridget fussed around Conrad, slipping him the best bits. Aubrey and Noah were talking loudly about their accomplishments at practice, interrupting each other, and Finley sat quietly in the corner of the table, barely touching his food. "Eat normally," Bridget urged him. "You know we don't leave the table until everyone's finished." Finley started to eat obediently, but I could see he was struggling with each bite. "So, how are things going at work, Conrad?" I asked, trying to lighten the mood. "Great," he replied with a smug smile. "I've been promoted to senior designer. I have my own team now." "He works so hard," Bridget put in adoringly. "Sometimes he stays late." "Yes, business requires sacrifice," Conrad agreed, cutting off a piece of steak. "By the way, Bridget, I won't be able to go with you to your aunt's this weekend. I have to work on a new project." I noticed Bridget frown, but she quickly put on a smile. "Of course, darling. I understand." "Can I stay home too?" Noah asked. "It's Jaden's birthday on Saturday." "Me too," Aubrey said. "The girls and I have plans." Conrad nodded. "Sure, kids. I'll keep an eye on you." "What about the trip to Aunt Yvonne's?" Bridget asked with confusion in her voice. "We've been planning it for a month." "Well, go with Finley," Conrad shrugged. "It'll be good for you to spend time together. You're always saying you don't pay enough attention to your son." I could see the disappointment on Bridget's face and something else, fear, insecurity, but she just nodded and lowered her eyes. After dinner, when the kids had gone to their rooms and Conrad had settled into the living room with a bottle of beer, I helped Bridget clear the table. "What's going on, Bridgie?" I asked quietly, using her childhood nickname. "What do you mean?" She didn't look me in the eye, concentrating on wiping the already clean plates. "About the way you let Finley be treated. About how you've changed since you married Conrad." Bridget tensed. "Daddy, don't start. You don't understand anything. It's a complicated situation, a blended family. Everyone has to adjust." 4 years, Bridget. It's been 4 years. And I can see that your son is unhappy. I see Conrad's kids bullying him, and you're doing nothing. "I'm doing everything I can," she snapped, showing real emotion for the first time all evening. "You think this is easy? Keeping this marriage, this house, this family together? Is it worth preserving?" I asked her bluntly. "This Family where your own child is an outcast? Bridget turned pale. You've always been against Conrad. From the very beginning, you never gave him a chance. I've given him 4 years of chances, I replied, and I can see the results. Look, I helped you buy this house so you and Finley would have a safe place to live. I continue to pay most of the mortgage. But if this is where my grandson is unhappy— What? Bridget interrupted, fear in her eyes. What are you saying? I looked at my daughter, whom I had once known better than anyone in the world, and I saw a stranger in front of me, a woman who let her child suffer to maintain a semblance of well-being, a woman who became a shadow next to a man who didn't even respect her. I say I'll renegotiate my financial arrangements, I said firmly. And my will, too. Bridget turned even paler. You can't. This house. We can't afford the mortgage without your help. Then we're going to have to make a change, I said, turning to leave the kitchen. Because I'm not sponsoring what goes on in this house anymore. As I walked up to the guest room, I could hear Bridget and Conrad's muffled voices coming from the living room. She was saying something excitedly, and he was responding with annoyance. I walked quietly past Finley's room and peeked inside. The boy was lying in bed, hugging his ragged rabbit, reading a book by the light of a small lamp. "Good night, Finley," I said, and he looked up at me with hopeful eyes. "You're not leaving yet, are you, Grandpa?" "No, baby. I'll be here as long as I need to be," I promised. And in that moment I made my final decision. Tomorrow I'll call my lawyer Lambert and change my will. This house and most of my property will go not to Bridget, but to Finley. And until he comes of age, everything will be administered by a trust. I will not allow my legacy to be used to make my only grandson miserable. The next morning I woke up early, long before there was any sign of life in the house. The clock on the bedside table showed 6:30. The old habits of the postal worker stayed with me even after retirement. I always rose at first light. In the quiet of the house, I pulled out my cell phone and dialed a familiar number. Lambert Finch, my attorney for the past 30 years, was also an early bird. Our long-standing business relationship had long since grown into a friendship, and I knew I could call him any time. "Walter." His deep voice sounded cheerful despite the early hour. "What a surprise. Is everything all right?" "I need your help, Lambert. I want to change my will. How soon can we meet?" There was a brief pause. "Is it that urgent?" There was concern in his voice. "Are you all right, Walter?" "There's nothing wrong with my health," I grinned. "It's just a family emergency. I'm in Martinsville with my daughter." "I understand," Lambert replied, though I doubted he really understood. "I can see you tonight at 10 o'clock. Would that work?" "Perfect. Thank you, friend." I heard footsteps in the hallway and quietly peeked out of the room. Finley, still in his dinosaur pajamas, was tiptoeing toward the stairs. "Good morning, kiddo," I whispered. He flinched and turned around, but when he saw me, he brightened up. "Grandpa, are you awake already?" "Old people don't like to lie in bed for long," I winked. "Where are you going so early?" "I wanted to read before school," he answered. "The house is quiet when everyone's asleep." I felt my heart clench. A 7-year-old boy having to sneak around his own house to enjoy silence and a book. "Let's have breakfast together," I suggested. "I make great pancakes." His face brightened. "Blueberry? Mom doesn't make pancakes very often." "Blueberries," I confirmed. "If you have blueberries, of course." "I have frozen blueberries." Finley nodded. "Conrad bought some for Aubrey's smoothie." We went down to the kitchen in silence, and I started making breakfast while Finley sat at the table with a book. When the first batch of pancakes were ready, he put his reading aside and pounced on the food with gusto. "Good?" I asked, watching him devour the pancakes. "The best in the world," he replied with his mouth full, and I laughed. By 7 o'clock, the kitchen was filled with the aroma of pancakes and coffee. Bridget was the first to arrive, dressed in a business suit, her hair in a neat bun. "Daddy?" She was surprised. "Are you cooking?" As you can see, I answered, flipping another pancake. Finley and I were starving. She glanced nervously at her son, who was smiling happily as he ate his third batch. Finley, you know you have to wait for everyone for breakfast. I'm sorry, Mom. The boy immediately snickered, and I saw the joy disappear from his face. Leave the baby alone, Bridget, I said calmly. He woke up early and he was hungry. What's wrong with that? She pressed her lips together but remained silent as she poured herself a cup of coffee. A few minutes later, Aubrey and Noah appeared in the kitchen, already dressed in their school uniforms with disgruntled faces. Pancakes? Aubrey asked, sniffing. I don't eat carbs in the morning. And I don't like blueberries, Noah added. There are plain pancakes without blueberries, I replied. And fruit. Take your pick. They looked at each other, but sat down at the table. Conrad was the last to arrive, fully dressed and with a briefcase in his hand. What's that smell? He asked, entering the kitchen. Bridget, are you cooking? It's Dad, she said with a strained smile. He wanted to treat us to breakfast. Conrad looked at the table with a critical eye. Very nice, but I have a meeting in 40 minutes. I'll have coffee on the road. He poured the coffee into a mug, pecked Bridget on the cheek, ruffled Aubrey and Noah's hair, and walked out without even a glance at Finley. I'm going too, Bridget said, finishing her coffee. I have to have the store open by 9. Finley, don't be late for school. Aubrey, make sure he doesn't forget his lunchbox, okay? Aubrey rolled her eyes but nodded. As soon as Bridget left, the atmosphere at the table changed. Aubrey stopped pretending to eat her pancake and pushed her plate away. Would you stop smiling? She threw at Finley. You look like an idiot. Finley lowered his eyes and I felt my anger boil over. Aubrey, I said firmly, that's no way to talk in this house. This isn't your house, she said defiantly. This is my dad's house. I took a deep breath, reminding myself that she was just a child, albeit an unpleasant one. Actually, young lady, I helped buy this house long before your father came into Bridget's life, and I'm still paying most of the mortgage. Aubrey clearly hadn't expected that answer. She blushed and silently got up from the table. Let's go, Noah. We're going to be late. They grabbed their backpacks and walked out, slamming the door loudly. Finley looked depressed. Don't mind him, kid, I encouraged him. Let's get ready for school. I helped him pack his backpack, made sure he hadn't forgotten his lunchbox, and walked him to the bus stop. Before he left, he gave me a big hug. Thanks for the pancakes, Grandpa. They were the best breakfast ever. After seeing him off, I went back into the house and started getting ready to meet Lambert. At 10:05, I was already sitting in his office, a small but elegant space in downtown Martinsville. Lambert Finch looked exactly the same as he had 20 years before, the same shrewd eyes behind thin glasses, the same neat gray beard, only there were more wrinkles. So, Walter, he began as we settled into his office, talk to me. I told him the details of the situation, everything I'd seen at my daughter's house, how Finley was being treated, how Bridget had changed. I want to change my will, I finished. I want to leave the house and most of my assets to Finley, not Bridget, and I want to set up a trust to manage everything until he comes of age. Lambert tapped his pen thoughtfully on the table. That's a big decision, Walter. Are you sure? Absolutely. I will not allow my money to be used to create a toxic environment for my grandson, and if I leave everything to Bridget, Conrad will have control. Who do you want to appoint as trustee of the foundation? I've been thinking. You, if you don't mind. You're the only one I trust completely. Lambert nodded. Good. I'll prepare the paperwork. But I must warn you, this could cause serious conflict in the family. I know, I sighed. But I have to protect Finley. He deserves a better future. We spent 2 hours discussing details and signing documents. When it was done, I felt strangely relieved, as if a heavy weight had been lifted off my shoulders. When do you plan to tell Bridget? Lambert asked as he walked me to the door. Tonight, I said firmly. The sooner the better. When I returned to my daughter's house, I found Bridget already home. She was sitting in the kitchen looking through some papers. "Daddy," she looked up, "where have you been? I came in for lunch and you weren't here." "At the lawyer's," I answered honestly, deciding not to beat around the bush. She tensed up. "At the lawyer's? Why?" "I changed my will," I said, sitting down across from her, "and I'm cutting off the mortgage on this house." Bridget turned pale. "What? Why? Because of last night? Dad, you can't—" "I can," I firmly interrupted her, "and I already have. The house and most of my assets are now in Finley's name. A trust fund will manage everything until he's of age." She looked at me in disbelief. "You disinherited me? Because of one night when I was a little hard on Finley?" "This isn't about one night, Bridget." I shook my head. "It's about what happens in this house all the time. It's about how you let your husband and his children treat your son. It's about how you've changed." "I haven't changed," she countered, but her voice trembled. "Yes, you have. You were a loving, caring woman. You swore you'd always protect Finley. And now you turn a blind eye to the way he's being humiliated in his own home." "That's not true," Bridget exclaimed, but I could see the doubt in her eyes. It's just that blended families are always difficult. It takes time." 4 years, Bridget. It's been 4 years. And I can see that your son is afraid in his own home, that he wakes up at dawn to read in silence because he's afraid of ridicule. That's not normal." She lowered her eyes and I saw her shoulders slump. "I'm trying, Daddy. But Conrad has his own ideas about parenting and I can't argue with him all the time." "Why not?" I raised my voice. "Why can't you stand up for your child? What happened to you, Bridget?" She raised her head and I saw tears in her eyes. "You don't understand. Conrad, he's helping us. We couldn't have done it without him. I can't keep contradicting him." "Helping you?" I asked in disbelief. "I pay the mortgage, Bridget. I've been helping you with Finley since he was born. Conrad just lives in the house I bought and lets his kids bully your son." Bridget jumped up, her face red with anger. "You've always hated him. From the very beginning, you never gave him a chance." "I gave him 4 years of chances," I exclaimed. "And what do I see? My grandson is afraid of his own home, and my daughter has turned into a shadow of the man I knew." We stood across from each other, breathing heavily. I couldn't remember the last time we'd fought like this. Maybe when she was 16 and wanted to quit school for some guy. But she'd been a teenager then. Now I was looking at a grown woman who was letting her child be bullied. "I'm not going to discuss this," Bridget said finally, wiping away her tears. "You don't understand our situation, and I won't let you destroy my family." "Your family is already being destroyed," I said quietly, "and you're the only one who doesn't see it." She shook her head and walked out of the kitchen, slamming the door loudly. I was left alone, feeling a mixture of anger, frustration, and deep sadness. Where had my little Bridgie gone? That girl who cried over the wounded chick, that young woman who vowed to devote her life to her son. In the evening, when everyone returned home, the atmosphere was electrified. Bridget had obviously told Conrad about our conversation because he was looking at me with ill-concealed hostility. Finley, sensing the tension, sat quietly in his corner, trying to be inconspicuous. After dinner, when the children had gone to their rooms, Conrad approached me in the living room. "Walter, I'd like to talk to you," he said in a tone he apparently considered friendly. "In private." I nodded, and we walked out onto the back porch. The evening was cool and the air smelled like an approaching thunderstorm. "Bridget told me about your decision," Conrad began, lighting a cigarette. "I understand your concern, I really do. But I don't think you see the whole picture." "Enlighten me," I replied dryly. He took a drag and exhaled slowly. "Finley is a special kid. Sensitive. Sometimes too sensitive. My kids are more adapted to the real world. They're trying to toughen him up, make him stronger. Their methods may not always be perfect, but their intentions are good. I could hardly contain my laughter. Are you serious? Bullying and humiliation is hardening? Conrad wrinkled his nose. You're being dramatic. Kids just tease each other. It's normal. I grew up with 3 brothers, and believe me, we did a lot more than that. Is that an excuse? I asked in disbelief. Just because you were abused as a child gives you the right to hurt others? He shook his head. You don't understand. The world is cruel, Walter. I'm trying to prepare Finley for that cruelty, so that he doesn't break at the first challenge. Family is supposed to be a refugee from the cruelty of the world, I argued, not the source of it. Conrad was silent for a moment, then he changed tactics. Look, I know you love Finley, we all do, and I promise I'll keep a closer eye on the kids to make sure their games don't go too far. But this change of will, it will put unnecessary strain on the family. You don't want that, do you? What I do want is for my grandson to be happy and feel safe, I replied. And so far, I don't see that. Conrad sighed, and I could see the change in his face. The mask of good-naturedness had slipped away, revealing cold calculation. You're putting Bridget in a very difficult position, Walter. She loves you. She loves Finley, but she's also my wife, and I will not allow our family to be destroyed. Is that a threat? A statement of fact, he replied, putting out his cigarette on the railing. Think about what you're doing, about the consequences, about how it will affect Bridget, on Finley. Do you really want the boy to grow up thinking his grandfather destroyed his mother's family? He turned and walked away into the house, leaving me alone with my thoughts. I realized he was trying to manipulate me, playing on my love for my daughter and grandson. But there was also a stab of truth in his words. My actions could indeed lead to unpredictable consequences. But seeing the way Finley cringed at the sound of Conrad's voice, the way his eyes dimmed when Aubrey and Noah entered the room, I knew I couldn't leave it at that. Later that evening, as I walked past Bridget and Conrad's bedroom, I heard their muffled conversation. You have to solve this problem, Conrad was saying. It's your father. Convince him to change his mind. I've been trying, Bridget sounded tired. You know how stubborn he is. Then try harder. Conrad's voice became steely. We can't afford to lose this house. Not with my debts. I know, Bridget sighed. I'll think of something. You better figure it out, Conrad replied, or we're going to have to reevaluate our relationship. There was silence, and then I heard Bridget sobbing softly. Please don't say that. I'll fix it, I promise. I stepped away from the door, feeling nauseous. So here's the thing. Conrad hadn't married Bridget out of love, but because of the financial stability she could offer thanks to my help. And now that that stability is threatened, he's not shy about blackmailing her. And my daughter, my proud, independent Bridget, is letting him do it. Allowing him to manipulate me, to humiliate my son, to destroy everything I've tried to build for her. I peeked into Finley's room before bed. The boy was already asleep, hugging his ragged rabbit tightly. His face was calm in his sleep, without the tension that appeared when he was around Conrad and his children. Looking at my sleeping grandson, I made a final decision. Not only would I leave the will as is, but I would do everything I could to protect Finley from the toxic atmosphere of this house, even if it means going against my own daughter. Because what mattered most in this situation was Finley, an innocent child who deserved better than a life of fear and humiliation. And if Bridget couldn't or wouldn't protect her son, it would have to be me. The next morning brought a striking change. When I went down to the kitchen, Bridget was already bustling about, preparing breakfast. There was a plate of pancakes, fresh fruit, and orange juice on the table. Finley sat at the table and Bridget leaned over to him, adjusting his shirt collar or ruffling his hair with feigned tenderness. "Good morning, Daddy," she smiled when she saw me. "We've been waiting for you. Sit down. I made your favorite blueberry pancakes." I looked at this idyllic scene with suspicion. Yesterday we'd broken up after a bitter fight, and today she was pretending as if nothing had happened. "Good morning," I said, taking a seat next to Finley. "How did you sleep, little man?" "Fine, Grandpa." Finley nodded, but I could see the shadow of worry in his eyes. He could clearly sense the tension between the adults. "We have a special day today," Bridget announced, setting a plate in front of me. "I took the day off so we can spend some time together. Why don't we go to the park? Finley likes to feed the ducks." "Yes, I do," the boy said, but his voice sounded uncertain, like he was repeating a learned phrase. At that moment, Conrad entered the kitchen, already dressed for the office, but with an unusually wide smile. "Good morning, family," he exclaimed with exaggerated cheerfulness. "Oh, pancakes! Bridget, you are a treasure." He walked over to her and kissed her cheek, then, to my surprise, leaned over and patted Finley on the head. "What's up, champ? Ready for school?" Finley flinched at that touch, and I saw him pull away instinctively. "Yes, sir," he answered quietly. "Sir?" Conrad laughed, casting a quick glance in my direction. "You can call me Dad, you know that." Finley nodded, not lifting his eyes from his plate. Aubrey and Noah soon appeared, also unusually polite and smiling. Aubrey even sat down next to Finley and offered to help him with his math homework. "You're so smart," she said with a fake sweetness in her voice. "I bet you're top of the class, aren't you?" Finley looked at her with undisguised surprise and apprehension, as if expecting a catch. "Yeah, I'm doing okay," he mumbled. "He's just being modest," Bridget intervened. "Miss Ellington says he's the brightest student in the class." I watched this spectacle with growing irritation. Did they really think I couldn't see the falsity? That I would believe in this sudden idol after all I had seen yesterday? After breakfast, Conrad drove the children to school, another unexpected concern on his part. As soon as they left, Bridget sat down next to me with a cup of coffee. "Daddy, I wanted to apologize for yesterday," she began. "I was wrong. You're worried about Finley, and that's understandable. But trust me, we're really trying. It's just sometimes it's hard to balance the needs of all the kids." I looked at my daughter carefully. She looked sincere, but something in her eyes, some underlying worry, told me that wasn't the whole truth. "Bridget," I said slowly, "I've known you your whole life, and I can tell when you're not telling me the truth. What's really going on?" She looked away, stirring her coffee nervously. "Nothing. It's just, Conrad and I had a talk yesterday, and we decided that we need to pay more attention to Finley. He's right. Sometimes we're too busy with ourselves and the other kids." "And this has nothing to do with changing my will?" I asked bluntly. Bridget flared up. "You're being unfair. Yes, your decision made us think, but not in the way you mean. We just realized that maybe we weren't showing enough of how much we loved Finley." I sighed. It was obvious that we weren't going to have a real conversation. "Okay, Bridget, if you say so." The day passed in a strange, strained atmosphere. Bridget did take Finley and I to the park, where we fed the ducks and walked along the lake. She was constantly taking pictures of us, especially moments when she was hugging her son or laughing with him. From the outside, we looked like a happy family, but I noticed how tense Finley's shoulders were, how unnatural Bridget's smile was. In the evening, when everyone was home, the show continued. Conrad brought Finley a new book about dinosaurs. Aubrey offered to play a board game with him, and Noah even shared his favorite comic books. Finley took it all in with apprehension and distrust, as if he expected that things could change at any moment. I watched this, realizing that they were trying to convince me that Finley was okay, that he was loved and happy in this family. But the more they tried, the more fake it all seemed. Before I went to bed, I went into Finley's room. He was sitting on the bed, looking at a new book, but without much enthusiasm. "How was your day, kid?" I asked, taking a seat next to him. He shrugged. "It was okay, just weird." "Weird?" "Yeah," he nodded. Mom doesn't usually spend this much time with me, and Conrad never gives me presents, and Aubrey and Noah don't play with me at all. I stroked his head. How's that for a change? Finley thought for a moment, then said quietly, It's a little scary, like they're up to something. His words made my heart sink. A 7-year-old shouldn't be afraid of sudden kindness from his family. Don't worry, I said. I'm here for you. And you know what? Why don't you come visit me this weekend? I have an old railroad at home that I used to build for your mom. His face brightened up. Did it? Can I? Sure. I'll talk to your mom tomorrow. He hugged me tightly, and I felt the little body relax in my arms. The next morning, I suggested to Bridget that she let Finley come with me for the weekend. To my surprise, she didn't object. That's a great idea, she said. It's good for you to spend time together. She hesitated. Maybe it'll help you see that we're really trying, that things are changing for the better. I nodded, not wanting to argue. What was more important was that Finley would be able to get a break from this house, at least for a couple days. On Friday after school, I picked up Finley and drove her to my house, a small but cozy house on the outskirts of Martinsville where I'd lived since retiring. As soon as we crossed the threshold, I noticed the change in Finley, his shoulders squared, his eyes sparkling, his movements freer. This is where I live, I said, showing him the house. It's nothing fancy, but I like it. It's great, Finley exclaimed, looking around curiously. And it's so quiet. I smiled, realizing what he meant. My house didn't have the constant tension of Bridget's. We spent the evening putting together an old railroad I'd pulled out of the attic. Finley was delighted, especially when the little train started moving along the tracks, making a quiet honking sound. We don't have toys like this at home, he said, watching the train. Conrad says real boys play video games or play sports. Do you like video games? I asked. Not really, Finley admitted. Aubrey and Noah play all the time, but I'm bored. I'd rather read a book. You're right, I encouraged him. Everyone likes something different. There's nothing wrong with being different. He looked at me with gratitude. My mom used to say that too, but now she wants me to be more like Noah. What's different? I asked cautiously. When Mom became different. Finley hesitated, still watching the train. Probably when Conrad moved in with us. It was fine at first. He gave Mom flowers, they laughed a lot, but then he started saying he had to have his rules in the house, and Mom stopped arguing. I listened to my grandson, feeling a heaviness growing in my chest. It's a classic story. The manipulator first charms, then gradually establishes control. The next day, we went to the local Natural History Museum where there was an exhibit about dinosaurs. Finley was enthralled, telling me about each exhibit with the enthusiasm of a real little scientist. I couldn't help but notice how much he had changed away from home. Animated, inquisitive, confident. In the evening, as we sat on the back porch watching the stars, Finley suddenly asked, "Grandpa, did Mom and Conrad fight over money?" I looked at him in surprise. "Why would you think that?" "I heard them fighting," he explained. Conrad was yelling that he was in debt, and Mom was crying and saying she couldn't help him anymore. I tensed, so my suspicions were confirmed. "When was this?" "Last week," Finley answered. "I went to get some water at night and heard it. Conrad said that if his mom loved him, she should help him, and then he said something about your money." The picture was getting clearer and clearer. Conrad must have had serious financial problems and was counting on Bridget to help him, who in turn relied on my support. "Do they fight like this often?" I asked. Finley nodded. "It used to be less often, but now it's almost every night. Aubrey says her dad's too good for us, and that Mom and I should be grateful he lives with us at all." I clenched my fists, struggling to contain my anger. What kind of monstrous lies were being drummed into my grandson's head? On Sunday, before I drove Finley home, I asked him bluntly, "Do you like living with Conrad and his kids?" Finley was silent for a long time, then answered quietly, No, but Mommy loves him. And I love Mommy. I understand, kid. But sometimes grown-ups make mistakes too, and sometimes what seems like love isn't really love. Like in that fairy tale about the princess who thought she loved the evil sorcerer? Finley asked. I smiled at his insight. Yes, very much so. Sometimes people can charm us, make us believe they're kind and loving, but then they show their true colors. And then what do? Be strong, tell the truth, and remember that true love never requires you to suffer or change. When we returned to Bridget's house, the atmosphere had changed markedly. The ostensible idol of the first few days was gone. Bridget looked tense and tired. Conrad was irritable, and Aubrey and Noah were back to their usual dismissive behavior toward Finley, though they were careful not to make it too obvious in my presence. How was the weekend? Bridget asked, helping Finley unpack his backpack. Great, exclaimed the boy. We went to the dinosaur museum and Grandpa bought me a book about stars, and we built a real railroad. How nice, Bridget smiled, but her smile didn't reach her eyes. Now go wash your hands before dinner. When Finley left, she turned to me. Thank you for taking him. He hasn't been this happy in a long time. Maybe you should wonder why, I asked quietly. Bridget looked away. Daddy, don't start. We're trying. You saw it. I saw the play, I countered. And now I see that nothing has changed backstage. She sighed. It's complicated. Conrad. He's going through a rough patch. Problems at work, financial issues. Debts, I said bluntly. He has debts, and he's using you to cover them. Bridget went pale. Who told you that? Is it true? She lowered her head and I saw her shoulders slump. Yes, she admitted quietly. He's had some bad investments and gambling debts, but he's working on it. He's going to change. Bridget, I took her hand. Listen to yourself. You're making excuses for a man who's using you financially and emotionally, who lets his children abuse your son. He loves me, she said stubbornly, but there was no conviction in her voice. Does he? I asked softly. Or does he just need someone to pay his bills and put up with his kids? I saw the pain in her eyes and I knew my words had struck a nerve. But instead of admitting the truth, she pulled away. You don't understand. He's my husband. We're family. I can't just... Can't what? Protect your son. Remember who you were before he came into your life? Bridget shook her head. That's easy for you to say. You're not alone. You have a pension, a house. What do I have? A small store that barely makes ends meet. A child to raise. Without Conrad, You'll do fine, I said firmly. Just like you've done before. I'll help you. If I do what you want me to do, she grinned bitterly. If I kick Conrad out and become a good daughter. If you choose your son's happiness over a man who uses you, I corrected her. Our conversation was interrupted by Conrad entering the kitchen. What are you whispering about? He asked with feigned ease, but I could see the suspicion in his eyes. Just discussing the weekend, Bridget answered, quickly backing away from me. Dad and Finley had a great time. Great, Conrad nodded. Maybe next time we could all go somewhere together, a family vacation. I noticed Bridget tense at the mention of family vacation, and I remembered the canceled trip to her aunt's house. That would be wonderful, I said with a touch of irony. But I'd rather spend time alone with Finley. It's obviously good for him. Conrad narrowed his eyes, catching my implication. Well, he's always happy to see his grandfather, isn't he, dear? Bridget nodded, avoiding my gaze. Of course he is. Daddy's always welcome. I could see through her, that strained smile, those downcast eyes. My daughter, once so strong and independent, had become a shadow around this man. And the reason was clear. Emotional dependence, perhaps even fear. Fear of being alone, fear of admitting she'd made a mistake in committing her life to Conrad. That night, lying in the guest room, I thought long and hard about the situation. Bridget was a grown woman, capable of making her own decisions, even if those decisions were wrong. I couldn't force her to have an epiphany if she didn't want to see the truth herself. But Finley was a child, defenseless against this toxic environment, and if his mother couldn't or wouldn't protect him, it was up to me. I decided that I would take my grandson with me as often as I could, and keep a close eye on the situation in the house. Because despite Bridget's reassurances, I felt that things were only getting worse. For the next 2 weeks, I continued to stay at Bridget's house, keeping an eye on things and spending as much time with Finley as possible. Every weekend, I took him to my house, creating a little island of calm for the boy in his troubled life. At first, Conrad pretended not to mind my presence and Finley's frequent visits to me, but gradually, his true attitude began to show. The mask of friendliness was slipping, revealing irritation and open hostility. "Don't you think you interfere too much with our family life?" he asked one evening when we were alone in the living room. Bridget was putting Finley to bed and Aubrey and Noah were in their rooms. "I'm just visiting my daughter and grandson," I replied calmly. "Is there anything wrong with that?" Conrad grinned, sipping whiskey from his glass. "You know exactly what I mean. Your constant conversations with Finley alone, your weekends with him, all that surveillance. You're undermining my authority in this house." "Authority has to be earned," I said, "not imposed by fear." His face darkened. "You don't know anything about parenting. A boy needs a firm hand. Otherwise, he'll grow up to be a weakling like—" He didn't finish the sentence, but I said. He didn't finish his sentence, but I knew exactly what he meant. Like his father, Finley's biological father who died in a car accident. A man Conrad had never met, but felt it was his duty to belittle at every opportunity. "Finley is a smart, sensitive boy," I replied, holding back my anger. "And he deserves respect, not intimidation." Conrad finished his whiskey in one gulp and set the glass on the table with a loud clatter. "Respect? At his age? You're being too soft, Walter. It won't do him any good." With those words, he left the room, leaving me alone with my growing unease. I knew there was something going on behind my back that Finley was afraid to tell me. The next day, I noticed that Aubrey and Noah had changed their behavior towards me as well. Where before they just ignored my presence, now there was outright hostility coming from them. Aubrey rolled her eyes at every word I said, and Noah defiantly left the room when I entered. One day, I overheard them talking as I passed Aubrey's room. "He's ruining everything," the girl said. "Daddy said if this keeps up, we're going to have to sell the house." "Because of that old man?" Noah wondered. "Why?" "Because he stopped giving Bridget the money," Aubrey explained. "And now she's whining and refusing to take out the loan Dad needs." "What are we supposed to do?" Noah asked with concern in his voice. "Dad said we have to show him that he's not needed here," Aubrey replied, "and that Finley was our brother, not his grandson." I stepped quietly away from the door, feeling my insides boil with anger. Conrad wasn't just being hostile, he was turning his children against me, all because of the money, because I'd stopped sponsoring his comfortable life at Bridget and Finley's expense. Bridget, meanwhile, seemed increasingly tense and irritable. She avoided direct conversations with me, answering in one-word answers and constantly finding excuses to avoid talking to me. I could see how she was torn between loyalty to her husband and to me, and how this internal struggle was wearing her down. "Bridget," I tried to talk to her one morning when we were alone in the kitchen. "We need to talk about what's going on." She sighed, machine wiping the already clean countertop. "Daddy, please, not now." "When?" I gently insisted. "You've been avoiding me for a week now. Conrad is openly hostile. His children are following suit. How long can this go on?" Bridget finally looked up at me, and I saw a mixture of weariness and despair in her eyes. "What do you want me to do? Choose between my husband and my father? Break up a family?" "I want you to see what's going on," I replied. "Conrad is using you. He married you because of the financial stability I provided. And now that that stability is threatened, he's showing his true colors. You're wrong. Bridget shook her head, but her voice sounded uncertain. He loves me. It's just that he's going through a rough patch. How long is this rough patch? I asked. A year? 2? The whole time you've been married? Bridget, let's face it, he's using you. And he's letting his kids bully Finley. Her face twitched at the mention of her son. Finley, he's fine. He's just a little withdrawn. Because he lives in constant fear. I raised my voice, but I pulled myself together. I'm sorry, but you need to see what's going on under your roof. Bridget looked at me with the expression of a hunted animal. I see more than you think, she said quietly. But I don't have your freedom, Daddy. I can't just drop everything and start over. Why not? I asked. You're a strong, smart woman. You have me. I'll always be there for you. What keeps you with a man who makes you and your son suffer? She was silent for a long time. Then she said quietly, Fear. Fear of being alone. Fear of failure. Fear that people will say I couldn't keep my family together. That I'm a bad mother. But isn't it worse to let your child suffer to maintain the appearance of well-being? I asked softly. Our conversation was interrupted by the sound of the front door. Conrad was back, even though he was supposed to be at work. Bridget flinched and backed away from me, as if she'd been caught doing something forbidden. Bridget? Conrad called out, entering the kitchen. His gaze flickered between us, a look of suspicion on his face. What were you two talking about? We were just discussing plans for the weekend, Bridget answered quickly. Dad wants to take Finley back to his place. Conrad frowned. Again, I think the boy should spend more time with his family, with us. I'm his family, I pointed out calmly, and Finley likes to visit me. Of course he does, Conrad grinned. You spoil him. No rules, no discipline, just fun and presence. I just let him be a child, I replied. Read the books he likes. Talk about things that interest him. Not be afraid of every rustle. Conrad narrowed his eyes. What do you mean? I think you understand perfectly well. I met his gaze without fear. The tension in the kitchen could have been cut with a knife. Bridget shifted her gaze nervously from her husband to me, clearly not knowing which side to take. Conrad, she finally said in a shaky voice, can't we really let Finley go to Grandpa's? He likes it there and— No, Conrad cut him off. We have family plans this weekend. We'll all go to the country together. I could see the surprise on Bridget's face. It was obviously news to her, too. But you said you were supposed to be working on a project. Circumstances have changed, Conrad replied coldly. I decided it would be good for all of us to spend some time together, like a real family. The emphasis on the word real was clearly directed at me. It was his way of showing that I was a stranger invading his territory. I couldn't sleep for a long time that night, thinking about what had happened. It was obvious that Conrad felt threatened by me and was trying to consolidate his power over Bridget and Finley. But what was he doing when I wasn't around? How did they treat Finley when they didn't have to pretend in front of me? The answer came faster than I expected. The following Monday, as I was picking Finley up from school, with permission from Bridget, who was busy at the store, I noticed that he was moving stiffly, as if every step was hurting him. What's wrong, kid? I asked, helping him into the car. Did you hurt yourself? Finley lowered his eyes, avoiding my gaze. No, just, fell in gym class. I felt my insides clench with a bad feeling. Can I see it? He reluctantly pulled up his shirt sleeve, and I saw a large bruise on his forearm, clearly not from a fall in gym class. Finley, I said seriously, please tell me the truth. Who did this? He was silent for a long moment, then he said quietly, Noah. We were playing, and he pushed me against the stair railing, but he said it was an accident. Do you think it was an accident? I asked cautiously. Finley shook his head, and I saw tears glisten in his eyes. He was laughing, and so did Aubrey. They said I should be more careful since I was so clumsy. Does Mom know? No, Finley answered quickly. Please don't tell her. She'll get upset and Conrad will be angry. Conrad? What does Conrad have to do with this? Finley squirmed in his chair. He said, real men don't complain. That if I complained to my mom, I'd show her how weak I was. I took a deep breath, trying to control the anger that threatened to overwhelm me. Finley, listen to me. What Noah did is not a game. It's not okay. And you have every right to talk about being hurt. It doesn't make you weak. It makes you honest and brave. He looked at me hopefully. Really? Absolutely true, I confirmed. And I promise I won't let anyone hurt you. Ever. On the drive home, I made a decision. I couldn't leave Finley in that house anymore. The situation had gone from emotional abuse to physical abuse, and I wasn't going to wait for something more serious to happen. When we arrived, Conrad was already home, earlier than usual. He was standing on the porch with his arms crossed over his chest as if waiting for us. Where have you been? He asked as soon as we got out of the car. School ended 2 hours ago. We stopped at the park, I answered. Bridget knew I was going to pick up Finley. You have homework to do, Conrad said, ignoring me and turning to Finley. Go inside. Finley gave me a startled look, but obediently headed for the door. I noticed him trying not to show that it hurt to move his arm. As soon as the boy disappeared into the house, Conrad turned to me. I didn't give you permission to pick him up from school. I don't need your permission, I replied calmly. I'm his grandfather. And Bridget didn't mind. I'm the head of this family, Conrad hissed, and I decide what happens to the children under my roof. Including pushing a 7-year-old over the railing? I asked, looking him straight in the eye. Conrad looked confused for a moment, then quickly pulled himself together. I don't know what you mean. Finley has a bruise on his arm, a big bruise. From Noah pushing him against the stair railing and laughing with Aubrey. Conrad shrugged. Kids were playing. An accident. It wasn't an accident, I countered, and we both know it. You're exaggerating, Conrad dismissed me. Finley's too sensitive. He needs to learn to stand up for himself. Against children who are older and stronger, against a grown man who encourages their bullying. Conrad's face darkened with anger. Careful with the accusations, Walter. You're in my house. No, I said firmly. This is Bridget's house, the house I helped her buy, and I will not have it turned into a place where my grandson is abused. Our conversation was interrupted by Bridget pulling up in her car. She got out, looking at us worriedly. What's going on? She asked as she came closer. Your father is meddling in our lives again, Conrad answered. He took Finley out of school without my permission. I told him he could take Finley, Bridget objected. I was busy at the store. You should have asked me first, Conrad cut him off. I'm the head of this family. I saw Bridget cringe at his tone, and that was the last straw. Bridget, I said, looking my daughter in the eye. Finley has a bruise on his arm. Noah pushed him against the railing and laughed with Aubrey. This wasn't the first time this had happened, and Conrad knew about it. Bridget went pale. What? No, this can't be. Conrad. It was just games, he shrugged. Children can be rude sometimes. Nothing terrible happened. No harm done? Bridget exclaimed, showing real emotion for the first time in a long time. My son hurt himself. Don't be so dramatic, Conrad said. The bruise will heal, but he'll be stronger. I watched Bridget's face change from shock to disbelief, then to anger. But then her shoulders slumped and she seemed to deflate. Maybe you're right, she said quietly. Maybe I am overprotective of him. I couldn't believe my ears. My daughter, my proud, caring Bridget, was justifying the abuse of her own child. I'm taking Finley, I said firmly. Tonight. He's going to stay with me until you get your problem sorted out. What? Conrad stepped toward me. You can't just take the baby. I can and I will, I said firmly. And if you try to stop me, I'll call Child Protective Services and tell them everything that's going on here. Conrad turned pale, and I realized I'd hit the mark. He couldn't allow an official investigation. There was too much that could come out. Bridget looked from me to her husband, clearly torn between her maternal instincts and her fear of Conrad. "Daddy, why don't we talk about this quietly?" she suggested. "I'm sure we can find a solution." "There's nothing to discuss," I cut her off. "Your son is in danger, and if you can't or won't protect him, I will." I headed toward the house to gather Finley's things. Conrad tried to block my path, but I walked past him, ignoring him. At that moment, Finley came running out of the house, attracted by the noise. "What's going on?" he asked fearfully. "You're coming to stay with me for a while," I said, trying to speak calmly. "Pack your things, your books, whatever you need." His face brightened, but immediately became anxious again when he looked at his mother. "Mom?" Bridget looked lost, like she didn't know what was going on. Maybe this is really better," she finally said. "Just for a while, until things calm down." "Bridget," Conrad exclaimed, "you can't let him take your son, and you can't let your children abuse mine." She snapped suddenly, and I saw a glimpse of the Bridget I knew. "I'm tired, Conrad. Tired of pretending everything's okay when it's not." "What are you talking about?" His voice became dangerously quiet. "About what's going on in this house," Bridget replied, squaring her shoulders. "About the way you and your children are treating Finley. About your debts that I'm covering. About how you've been manipulating me since the beginning of our marriage." Conrad laughed, but the laugh came out nervous. "You're crazy. It's your father. He's turning you against me." "No," Bridget shook her head. "He just helped me see the truth I'd ignored for so long." I watched Conrad's face change from surprise to anger, then to cold calculation. "Okay," he said at last. "Let her go to her grandfather's. But remember, Bridget," he lowered his voice, "without me, you are nothing. Without my support, you can't make it." "I was happier without you," she replied quietly. "And so was Finley." Conrad narrowed his eyes, and I saw real hatred in them. "We'll talk about this later," he said. And then he went inside, slamming the door loudly. Bridget and I stayed on the porch looking at each other. I saw a mixture of fear, sadness, and a strange relief in her eyes, as if a heavy weight had been lifted off her shoulders. "I screwed up, didn't I?" she asked quietly. "Like a mother, as a daughter, as a person." "No," I replied softly. "You were just lost. But now you've taken a step in the right direction." She grinned bitterly. "It's too late." "It's never too late to correct mistakes," I said, "especially when it comes to your child." Finley returned with a small backpack full of books and toys and his trusty stuffed rabbit. "I'm ready, Grandpa." Bridget knelt down in front of her son and hugged him tightly. I saw him wince at the pain in his arm, but he didn't pull away. "You're going to stay with Grandpa for a while, okay?" she said, trying to smile through her tears. "And I'll try to make it up to you." "Promise?" Finley asked seriously. Bridget nodded, unable to speak. Finley and I got in the car and drove away, leaving Bridget standing on the porch. In the rearview mirror, I could see her crying, and my heart ached for her and for Finley. But I knew I was doing the right thing. Finley needed a safe place, and Bridget needed space to make important decisions about her life. At home, I helped Finley unpack and get settled in the guest room that would now become his room. He was quiet, but I could see the relief in his eyes. "Grandpa," he asked as I put him to bed, "is Mommy going to be mad at me?" "No, baby," I assured him. "Mommy loves you. She's just confused." "Because of Conrad?" I nodded, marveling at the insight of a 7-year-old. "Yes, because of him. But now she's starting to see the truth, and I'm hoping that things will change for the better soon." Finley nodded thoughtfully. "You know, Grandpa, I always wanted to live with you, but I didn't want to leave Mom alone, with Conrad. You're a very brave and caring boy, I said, feeling a lump come up in my throat. Mom knows that. That's why she agreed to let you stay with me. She wants you to be happy and safe. Will she be safe? Finley asked, and I could hear the real worry in his voice. I'll make sure she is, I promised. Now get some rest. Tomorrow will be another day. When Finley fell asleep, I sat in the chair by the window and stared at the night sky for a long time. Tonight I saw my daughter begin to awaken from the long nightmare she'd been living in. But I also realized that she still wasn't completely free of Conrad's influence. She had allowed me to take Finley away, but she herself had stayed with a man who manipulated her and allowed his children to abuse her son. The Bridget I raised would never have allowed that to happen. The woman she had become was a stranger to me, and though I saw glimpses of the old Bridget, I wasn't sure if she could ever fully return. My first days together with Finley were filled with the quiet joy of discovery. My home, which for years had held only echoes of the past, was filled with children's laughter, the whisper of pages turning books, and endless questions about the world. Finley, cautious and quiet at first, as if afraid of being sent back, gradually squared his shoulders and grew more confident. We established a simple but cozy routine. I took him to school in the mornings and picked him up after school. Evenings were spent playing board games or reading. Finley was a surprisingly unpretentious child. He didn't need expensive toys or gadgets. He was happy just to be able to read his books without fear of ridicule or shouting. The bruise on his arm was fading, but I noticed other traces of his former life. He flinched at loud noises, sometimes froze half-heartedly, as if expecting to be interrupted or ridiculed, apologized for the smallest of transgressions. "I'm sorry, Grandpa," he would say when he accidentally dropped his spoon at dinner and there was real fear in his eyes. "It's okay, kiddo," I replied, trying to keep my voice calm and steady. "It happens to everyone." Gradually, those moments became less frequent. Finley began to trust that in my house he wouldn't be scolded for small mistakes, wouldn't be compared to other children, wouldn't be made to feel superfluous. I hadn't heard from Bridget for almost a week. I called several times, but she didn't answer. I was worried, but I didn't want to alarm Finley with my concerns. He asked about Mom often enough, asking if she was angry, if she missed him when they saw each other. "Mom's very busy," I answered, "but I'm sure she'll call soon." And indeed, on the 7th day, the phone rang. But Bridget's voice sounded different from what I'd expected, not guilty or conciliatory, but cold and determined. "I want you to give Finley back," she said without preamble. "Today." "Bridget?" I wasn't sure I understood her correctly. "What's wrong?" "Nothing happened," she cut me off. "I just realized you were manipulating me, using my temporary emotional state to take my son." I felt a chill go down inside. Those weren't her words. I could hear Conrad in them, his intonation, his logic. "Bridget," I said slowly, "do you remember why you agreed to let Finley go? Do you remember the bruise on his arm? Do you remember how Conrad justified it?" There was a pause, and I heard her heavy breathing. "It was an accident," she finally said. "The children were playing. You exaggerated everything. You made me believe." "I didn't exaggerate anything," I interrupted her. "You saw the bruise yourself. You heard Conrad justify it. And you know in your heart of hearts that this is not an isolated incident." "I won't discuss it," her voice trembled. "I want you to bring Finley home, tonight, or I'll go to the police." "On what grounds?" I asked calmly. "You let him go with me willingly. You're his mother, I'm his grandfather. There's no kidnapping." "Yeah, I'll say that you took advantage of my emotional state," Bridget said uncertainly. "That you threatened me. Are you going to lie?" I didn't recognize my daughter. "Did Conrad teach you that?" Another pause. I could hear muffled voices in the background. Conrad must have been there, telling her what to say. "Dad, please," she said, her voice pleading now. "Just bring Finley back. We'll work it out. Conrad promised that nothing like this would ever happen again. He's remorseful. I don't believe him, I said firmly. And neither should you. Conrad has shown his true colors, Bridget. He won't change. You don't understand, she was almost screaming. Without Finley, he's threatening to leave. Take Aubrey and Noah. I can't lose them all. So that was it. Conrad was blackmailing her, using her affection for his children to force her to give Finley back. Bridget, think about it. I tried to get through to her. If he uses his children as weapons against you, what kind of man is he? What kind of father is he? And how will he feel about Finley if you bring him back to this house? Yeah, I don't know. Her voice broke. I'm confused, Dad. I don't know what to do. Come to us, I suggested. Without Conrad. We can talk quietly. Finley misses you. There was another whisper in the background, and then Bridget said in a different, firm voice, No, either you give Finley back today or we go to court. And believe me, you don't stand a chance. I have every chance, I said calmly. I have evidence of child abuse in your home, and if you want to take this to court, be prepared for me to contact Child Protective Services. I heard her draw in a sharp intake of air. You're not going to do that. I will if I have to, I said firmly. I won't let Finley go back to an abusive home. You're destroying my family, Bridget exclaimed. You've always hated Conrad, always trying to turn me against him. That's not true, and you know it, I replied. I gave him a chance, 4 years of chances, but I won't let him cripple my grandson's life. After a week of deliberation, I decided to be proactive and contacted Lambert to prepare the temporary custody papers. We gathered all the evidence we needed, photos of the bruises, testimony from Finley's teacher about his behavior at school, my own observations. One day, on my way home from school with Finley, I saw Bridget's car in front of my house. She was standing on the porch, nervously clutching her bag. "Mom!" Finley exclaimed, rushing over to her. Bridget hugged her son, but her eyes on me were cold and determined. "I came here to talk," she said as we entered the house. Finley took her to show her his room, raving about our trips to the museum, the books we'd read, the friends he'd made at school. I watched Bridget's face change from determination to doubt, from anger to sadness. She saw how happy her son had become away from home. When Finley ran off to get his drawings, we were alone. "He looks happy," she said quietly. "He is happy," I replied. "For the first time in a long time." "I've filed a petition with the court," Bridget said, "for Finley's return. The hearing's in a week." "I know," I nodded. "We filed for temporary custody, too." Her face contorted with anger. "Are you really going to fight me for my son?" "I'm going to fight for his safety," I said firmly. "And you should be doing the same." "I am his mother," she exclaimed. "Of course I want what's best for him." "Then face it," I said. "Look how happy he's become away from Conrad and his children. Look at the bruises on his body. And ask yourself, do you really want him back in that house?" The custody hearing was a week later. I presented all the evidence I'd gathered. Bridget came with Conrad, who looked impeccable in a business suit. But his mask fell off when the judge ruled that custody would be temporarily awarded to me, with Bridget's right to see her son on a regular basis. "That's absurd!" Conrad exclaimed, jumping up from his seat. "The boy should live with his mother in a proper family." "Mr. Pierce," the judge said sternly, "any more of this behavior and I'll call security." The court made a decision based on the best interests of the child. After the hearing, Conrad tried to intimidate me, but I stood my ground. Bridget stood by, eyes downcast, not saying a word. Over the next few months, she visited Finley regularly. At first, her visits were tense, but gradually, seeing how happy her son was, she began to change. One day, as Finley fell asleep after a long day at the park, she stayed up late to talk. "I filed for divorce," she said quietly. "Last week." I nodded silently, not showing my surprise. Conrad first threatened, then begged, then threatened again, she continued. But I finally saw his real face. The one you've seen all along. What changed? I asked. I discovered that he was cheating on me, and his debts are much more serious than I thought. He almost bankrupted my store. She was quiet for a moment, then added, but most importantly, I realized I had chosen the wrong man, the wrong life. I betrayed Finley, betrayed myself, and I don't know if I'll ever be able to atone for it. You've already started, I said softly. Admitting your mistakes, that's the first step. Do you think Finley will ever forgive me? She asked with tears in her eyes. For not protecting him. He loves you, I said, and he'll understand. Maybe not now, but in time. And you? She asked me quietly. Can you forgive me? I looked at the daughter I'd loved all her life, the one I'd raised alone after her mother had left us. I have already forgiven, I answered simply. It had been a year since the day I'd taken Finley from Bridget's house, a year filled with change, growth, and healing. Finley had blossomed from a quiet, intimidating boy to a confident, inquisitive child. He became the best student in his class, made friends, and started astronomy club. His nightmares stopped. He no longer flinched at loud noises, no longer apologized for every step. Bridget finished the divorce proceedings and began to rebuild her life. Her store was barely keeping afloat because of the debts left behind by Conrad, but she wasn't giving up. She sold the house I had once helped her buy and moved into a small apartment closer to my neighborhood. The court allowed her to see Finley without my presence, and now he spent weekends with her twice a month. Conrad had tried to contest the divorce, demanding half the value of the house, but Lambert had helped prove that most of the mortgage was paid by me, and Conrad had no right to it. He left Martinsville with his children, and I hoped we'd never see him again. One evening, Finley and I were sitting on the back porch, watching the stars through the new telescope I'd bought him for his birthday. "Grandpa," he asked suddenly, looking away from the telescope, "are you happy?" I smiled, surprised by the question. "Of course I am, kid. Why do you ask?" "Just a thought," he shrugged. "You left your quiet life to take care of me. Maybe you'd be better off without all this trouble." I hugged him and said quietly, "There are problems in life that are worth solving, and there are people worth changing your life for. You're one of those people, and I have no regrets." Finley pressed himself against me, and we continued to look at the stars, two people who had found in each other the family they'd both been looking for. I knew there were still a lot of challenges ahead, building a relationship with Bridget, legal issues, Conrad's possible attempts to come back into our lives. But looking at Finley's happy face, I knew I'd done the right thing. Outside of town, on the outskirts of Martinsville, the house that had once been filled with fear and tension now had a "for sale" sign.